All right, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to whoever is joining. Today we are going to talk about ethnobotany and indigenous medicine. So, much like how we've spoken about herbal medicine, we're going to dig a little bit deeper and talk about exactly what those type of herbals and natural products mean in an ethnobotanical context. So, firstly, we've got to define what is ethnobotany. So, most simply, ethnobotany is the study of the relationship between plants and people. So it combines the studies of botany, pharmacy, anthropology, linguistics, sociology. It's a very all-encompassing thing. To put it most simply, it is seeing plants the same way that indigenous people see them. So, what do we see as scientists? So, we are all pharmacists or pharmacy students. What do we see as scientists in this case? Well, let's take an example. We have Kava, otherwise known by the Latin name Piper mythisticum. It's native to the tropical islands of the Pacific and Polynesia, so you might see this in Fiji and Hawaii, Vanuatu, other areas within the South Pacific. And its medicinal uses, we know stem and roots of the kava plant contain naturally occurring kavalactones, which have anxiolytic or anti-anxiety effects. They're likely more effective than placebo for treating short-term anxiety based on a Cochrane review, which is quite high-powered, which means, yes, kava does in fact work as a supplement to aid in usually sleep and anxiety. And it's popularly still used today as an anti-anxiety and sleep supplement available in most Western pharmacies, often in combination with something else. And as we look at this plant, in our heads, as scientists, as medicinal chemists, we're seeing this is the cavalactone sort of skeleton, and we're looking to see how these different hydroxyl groups, how these different OH groups, how these different uh, aromatic rings would all contribute to this therapeutic effect. Likewise, not just therapeutically effective, but we're also going to look at how they might cause hepatotoxicity in high doses. Indeed, Kava supplements got into quite a bit of trouble after folks went into liver failure trying detox supplements, and the FDA has issued warnings after multiple instances of failure due to poor regulation of Kava supplements, causing and inducing hepatotoxicity in patients who may have either been taking too much or may have been taking adulterated, misbranded, or otherwise unregulated Kava supplementation. So that's what we see as scientists or as pharmacists. In an ethnobotanical context, what do we see as ethnobotanists? Well, we see the kava plant, Piper mythisticum, but more commonly known where it grows as either awa in Hawaiian, as yakona in Fijian, or as kava kava in Tongan, which means bitter. And that kind of makes sense because those kavalactones have alkaloids in them. Those alkaloids will generally have a bitter taste, as we know from their phytochemical profile. And kava is of great cultural significance and reverence within Pacific Island cultures, almost all of which have kava ceremonies. Even, different cultures within Polynesia, Melanesia, you name it. They all have sort of their same idea of how to perform these kava ceremonies, which are quite vigorous. They involve preparation and ceremony. They grind the root, mixing it with water and straining the liquid to create a kava beverage during the ritual. And there's a video later on which I can't play because this is a recorded lecture, but I highly, highly encourage you to watch exactly how a kava ceremony is performed. In that case, it's in Fiji. And kava is also distributed in order of status, and that begins with some poured on the ground for the gods of the earth. So again, native cultures really have this sense, which we will talk about even more later on, of how important it is to acknowledge the land from which you live and from which you gain nutrients and which provides life for you and your family. And so they honor the gods first, the gods of the earth, and then it goes in order of status in terms of who drinks the kava. This is kind of like a tea ceremony as well. It's analogous to some tea ceremonies or other natural herbal medicine ceremonies that you might see in other cultures. Kava rituals are used to mark important formal occasions and events in society in Polynesia. So, for instance, they might have a kava ceremony when a new chief is appointed within the island. So, a bestowal of chiefdom. Kava ceremonies are common during weddings, during funeral rites. as well as welcoming and farewells to new guests. And many times, tourists who come to Tonga or come to Fiji, they will be able to have the pleasure of seeing and participating in a Kava ceremony. So, like I said, I can't play this video for you, but it is certainly worth it when you get the chance to view it by yourself. But what basically happens in the video is these journalists they go on to practice what we would call participant observation. So instead of just observing, as anthropologists have uh, figured out over years and years of practice, instead of just observing, it's much more effective to have the indigenous people teach you how to compound an herbal preparation or to participate in the kava ceremony among the indigenous people. This is a great way of better understanding the culture by experiencing it yourself and not influencing the culture, not being, an imperialist in that sense, saying that, oh, essentially it boils down to, and that's my last point here, successful ethnobotanists aren't there to teach anything. They strive to learn from other cultures. And how do you best learn? Many people best learn by doing. So that is through participant observation, which, if you go back to that video on the previous slide, you will be able to see active participant observation. Also, participant observation is an essential part of understanding the indigenous scientific method, which is trial, error, and success. So unlike our modern scientific method that we use and that you learn in, your basic science classes in high school, where you come up with a theory, then you have a hypothesis, and you test the hypothesis, you see if it's positive or negative. Uh, it boils down to trial, error, and success within most indigenous cultures. For instance, a tribesman finds some new berries and eats them. That's the trial. He gets a stomachache. That's the error. The tribe avoids that bush. And through time immemorial, from as days and weeks pass and centuries pass and millennia pass through the oral tradition, the tribe knows not to use that bush as something that they can eat. They know that they can't eat the berries from that bush because your grandfather's grandfather's grandfather already tried it, and we know after that trial and error that it is not a safe thing to do. However, if a tribesman finds some new berries and eats them, they taste good, he might bring them back to the village. Because of this empirical study, the tribe keeps the seeds from the berries so they can grow more seeds and sustain themselves. So again, it's not like with the example of the poison berries or whatever, the ones that aren't edible, it's not like they're going and analyzing, like saying, oh, well, there are clearly some alkaloids in here which uh, induce some CYP metabolisms, and we're not able to eat it because it has this and this drug interaction. No, they knew that it didn't necessarily work. They knew that it was poisonous, and therefore they knew to avoid it. And on the flip side of things, empirical study can also lead to new discoveries and new traditions, which again, as I mentioned, continue since time immemorial to today. Part of ethnobotany is also preserving cultural identity. And this is huge. And this is something that's extraordinarily important, especially as many of these native cultures are threatened by both the spread of modern society and other issues, whether it is in government, whether it is culturally, or whether it is unique challenges which influence the culture of these individual communities. Firstly, I'd like to point out the difference between cultural appropriation and cultural respect. And this is just not only is it on the surface just very nice to do, but it's very important to give respect and to honor cultures of those folks. Um, and hopefully give back to them when you are and not appropriate their culture. So my best example of this is here in Connecticut, we have two native casinos. We have Mohegan Sun and we have Foxwoods, which are from the Mohegan tribe and the Pequot tribe, respectively. And they do lean in quite into their Native American identities, and rightly so, because we do have Native Americans and who are still alive and from the Pequot tribe and Mohegan tribe and actively participate in the casinos. However, when you go to that casino and you go to the gift shop, I can speak for Foxwoods, I go there more often. You go to the gift shop and you see like dream catchers and mandalas and other things that are hanging up and traditional, they look like traditional Native American handicrafts. And and you look to see where they're made, and they're made in China or they're made in India. And I'm like, you have a tribe right here that you're not supporting, and you're essentially like outsourcing their culture to make a quick buck at the casino. I mean, that's cultural appropriation. True respect would be to source from actual Native American or Indian sources, and that shows cultural respect, and that goes beyond just selling dream catchers at a casino, but it also goes into whether it's the marketing of dietary supplements, whether it's the uh, dispersal of information on native traditional medicine practices, which are may or may not be attributed to the correct sources. We have to truly acknowledge and respect our native and indigenous Indian communities. I'll also take this moment to mention that I use the terminology Native American and Indian fairly interchangeably, and there's a reason for that. I'm being deliberate in that because what I found is there's a profound difference between the Native Americans on the East Coast of the United States and a few of the tribes in the Western United States. Uh, Folks around here, where I live in Connecticut, oftentimes they prefer to be called Native American, whether it's Pequot or Mohegan or Algonquin, Iroquois. If you don't know their exact tribe, you will call them Native American. However, if I were to talk with my friend out in Montana, who is a member of the Crow tribe, out in Montana, and I've talked about this with him too. He's like, "What? Oh, I hate when people call us Native Americans. It just sounds like primitive. It sounds like derogatory." He prefers being called an Indian and living on an Indian reservation, and he prefers the term Indian just because he thinks Native American sounds kind of like what? What am I, a caveman? Like, no, I'm not primitive. I'm an Indian. I'm proud to be from Indian country, and so certain tribes prefer to be called that, whether it's and it's a tribe by tribe basis. So I take that point just to say, do not assume that someone wants to be called either a Native American or an Indian or even an Alaska Native or Inuit or Eskimo or however you would like to um, describe them. Always ask first. Here's my little soapbox. Going on to preserving cultural identity, we have the effects of COVID-19, which have been quite profound, especially in uh, some very small communities. Oftentimes, these communities are isolated. So, if there is an outbreak of disease, they do not have the best access to healthcare, like we would say, living near hospitals and state-of-the-art treatment facilities if someone is to get very, very sick. And of course, there have been initiatives, thankfully, that have involved vaccinating elders of these tribes and oftentimes very, very small and isolated communities first. This has also led to a limiting of field studies with native peoples, which also makes sense because we do not want to introduce unnecessarily any germs in an already fragile community. Another initiative which has grown in traction over the past few years are indigenous controlled reserves, which makes a lot of sense on the face of it. It's that we should let the people who respect the earth and manage their lands. That's another form of what we would call environmental justice. I think it's a I always think back to there was a congressional candidate she was a who eventually I think she became the secretary for the Department of the Interior, but she was down in New Mexico and she was saying that it was her versus her opponent, and her opponent was saying something along the lines of like, "Oh, I'm a third generation New Mexican because he's from New Mexico." And he's very happy to lead the state. And then she, because she's Native American Indian, she would say, "Well, as a 40th generation New Mexican, here's what I think we should do about our public lands." And so it does make a lot of sense to have indigenous controlled reserves, just because they are the historic stewards of these places since before written history. Even that's where their tribes lived. Providing economic opportunities for Indigenous people is also essential in preserving cultural identity because if we give them economic opportunities, then we also help preserve their culture and ensure that they have the tools and the means necessary to preserve their culture going forward. Talking dictionaries are also essential, and these are really, really cool. Oftentimes, native languages are extraordinarily endangered because maybe only a few elder people in the tribe speak it, or just simply the tribe is small. Many Native American Indian tribes are quite small, and this goes for other languages across the globe as well, whether they're the indigenous peoples of Mexico and Central America, indigenous peoples who we're talking about later in Polynesia and on these small islands. Uh, Talking dictionaries are made by interviewing elders and getting examples of words and grammar so we can preserve the language for future generations to learn and to study. So it's both a linguistic technique, it's used quite often in cataloging native languages, and it also provides basically a living memory and a living record where you're listening to these elders speak and recite these passages of their mythology and of their tradition. And most of this tradition is also oral tradition. So it's talking dictionaries are a very cool technique that does preserve cultural identity and it provides a huge window into society. Because but what better way to learn about a society than to learn its language? Now, a good example of preserving cultural identity and going farther than that, revitalizing cultural identity is the Vine story that I like to tell students by Dr. Paul Cox. Now, Dr. Cox is probably one of the most famous ethnobotanists in the world. He is very accomplished within the field of ethnobotany, and he specializes in the ethnobotanical study of Polynesian cultures. Specifically, he spent a lot of time in Samoa. So, Samoa, the island in the South Pacific again, he studied the role of Fresinetia reinecke, which is a flowering plant native to eastern Samoa. This is what it looks like as it grows. And it's used the fronds of it, the plant, the leaves of this vine are braided together to make these very intricate fishing nets that kind of look like lobster pots for those of you who might have gone lobster fishing in the Northeast. But they're these very intricate structures that are used traditionally by the Polynesians on this island in eastern Samoa to fish, which is part of their livelihoods. However, on this one island that Dr. Cox visited, uh, through whether it was deforestation or just a lack of a certain climate change or what have you, uh, Freycinetia reinecke, the plant which grows this vine, which gets woven into these nets, uh, it had gone extinct on that particular island. So there was only maybe I think maybe the chief and the wife or another elder on the island who actually knew how to still braid and create these very intricate fishing nets and fishing baskets from the vines. So Dr. Cox had the idea of going to another island that's where the flowering plant still grew. There's another island where in multiple islands in Samoa. So he went to one and he picked a whole bunch of samples and he brings it back to the chief and the chief's wife. And he goes, "Hey, I have these. Would you mind doing a demonstration for us of how to weave these nets out of these vines and these baskets out of these vines so you can show the community of what you used to do?" And the wife goes, "Oh, these are awful. This is too short. This is too dead. This is why would you bring me this is this is not a good example of the plant. Why would you bring me this? This is insulting, blah blah blah." And he goes, "Look, oh, I'm so sorry, miss, but this is imagine I'm like a toddler right now. I'm just trying to bring you something and see if you can make it work and see if you can demonstrate to the community." And she says, "Well, okay, fine, this will do." So they do a whole demonstration weaving these baskets from these vines for the first time in maybe 50 years on the island. And everybody, the whole tribe has gathered round to watch this ancient, almost forgotten craft. And it starts inspiring folks. So they start transplanting those vines back to reintroducing them onto the island. And months go by and months go by. That inspires the next generation of these fishermen who become weavers of these baskets and these nets from the vines as they reintroduce this. And in doing so, that has preserved cultural identity from the brink of destruction. Without that intervention, who knows? It would have been lost to living memory. But now there's generation and new generations of these weavers who will go on to teach their children and continue uh, with a practice, a cultural practice that has gone on for thousands and thousands of years. So that is the Vine story by Dr. Paul Cox, and if that's my favorite example of preserving cultural identity. So I like to talk about, at least as an example, ethnobotany a bit closer to home. I recognize if you are a distant student, it is closer to home for me than it most likely is for you. But just to give you a little background of Western New England University and our native peoples, modern-day Springfield and Western Massachusetts was home to the Pocumtuck, which is a small tribe related to the Algonquins. You might know the Algonquins from your old history classes. They were famous for their lawn houses. The largest village was originally in Deerfield, Massachusetts, and Springfield was originally actually the native village of Agawam, which is now across the river. Why? Because during King Philip's War, this guy whose statue is sitting in Forest Park in downtown Springfield, Mass. King Philip, otherwise known as Chief Medicom, uh, his tribe fought in King Philip's War, burned Springfield, our city, to the ground in October of 1675. And as a result, Agawam relocated across the river. We got Springfield here. Algonquin medicine, and indeed most native medicine, is based around the balance of spiritual, emotional, and physical needs. And it also has this concept of kincentricity. So, kincentricity is the idea that all living things are your relatives or your kin. You have a kinship with your relatives. So, you treat the natural world as you would treat family. So, remember back to when I was talking about the Kava ceremony. That concept of kincentricity is within the Kava ceremony because what is the first thing they honor? They honor the earth and the gods of the earth from which they came by pouring out the first cup of Kava onto the sand, onto the dirt, onto back to the earth. And many times, if they were cutting down in Algonquin tradition, if you cut down a tree, you thank the spirits of the forest, you thank the gods of the earth for allowing you for this. You explain what you were going to do with the tree, how you are going to use it to make a canoe or to make yourself shelter. Likewise, if you are killing an animal, I think of bison on the plains, many times the Sioux or the Crow or the Blackfeet may thank the spirit of the buffalo. They might thank the spirits and the gods and thank the buffalo for its sacrifice, for providing for the community for months on end with its meat or with its bones for to pitch tents and teepees for shelter, you name it. So they treat the natural world like family and they have a true respect for it. In Northern Cree tradition and our Indigenous or First Nations friends up in Canada, they actually established what's known as the Anishinabeg Medicine Wheel, and it's used in many Algonquin cultures to achieve balance and prescribe natural remedies. So as we look at it, it kind of almost reminds us of yin and yang or some like Eastern traditions, where they have different spirits of, say, the North, the South, the East, and the West, and they all correlate with different plant medicines, different animals, different deer, different seasons, and the idea is, with it broadly, and this is a very broad characterization of how their medicinal system works, is you want to achieve balance within these four directions, within these four elements. And so if someone is having a fever or something like that, maybe then that is an imbalance of one of these traits. So maybe they have an imbalance of winter or something like that. That might mean they're cold. What are you going to do? You're going to counter that with plant medicine like cedar, which would otherwise be warm, to try and bring them back to that balance. Kind of like a yin and yang, like I said, in TCM or traditional Chinese medicine culture. It's that same kind of idea of balancing of the humors or the constitutions or what have you. And it's surprising kind of how a lot of cultures who never talked to each other, who never had any contact, kind of convergently figured out the same sort of theory that an illness is simply an imbalance of some sort of element within the body, which when some other element is used to try and uh, yeah, bring the balance more to a different direction and find that balance, that's where we get the basis of those medicine systems. So let's talk about some traditional medicines which are in use in the Northeast and are still at use today. So again, if you are around here, from around the Pioneer Valley, you would know a little bit farther south we have the Tobacco Valley, which as you go into Connecticut, and tobacco or Nicotiana tabacum is a herbaceous plant with small pink flowers, and of course every part of the plant contains nicotine, which is a stimulant alkaloid. It's an appetite suppressant. It's a highly addictive nicotinic receptor agonist, and it's also ironically used in smoking cessation treatment. So in Algonquin medicine, it was used often when asking something from Mother Earth to provide clarity or to provide clarity of thinking as you ponder something. And again, they didn't know that tobacco was a nicotinic receptor agonist, that nicotine was supposed to agonize those receptors and cause stimulation via its alkaloid properties. No, they used empiric study and they used trial and error in the indigenous scientific method, and they found that, wow, I do think more clearly after smoking this pipe. Leaves can also be pulverized into a paste or wrapped around a wound as a topical coagulant, so to stop the bleeding. Smoke was also blown into the ear to cure earache, and smoke was blown into the nostrils to arouse someone who had fainted. I mean, not the most pleasant thing to imagine, but you can think of how it could work. And of course, modern day, we still harvest the leaves and collect them and smoke it recreationally. Something that you may also be familiar with is sage or Salvia lyrata, just lyre leaf sage. It's an herbaceous plant with those very distinctive flowers and irregularly shaped leaves. Its active constituents, one of the most active ones that it has, is camphor, which you could probably tell. It's an aromatic terpene. Whenever we're talking about terpenes, those are our aromatic compounds, which provide usually the basis of essential oils, like you can see down there for the uses of sage. It's a very good essential oil for cough and colds. It was used traditionally by the Algonquins and other tribes to cleanse and hold positive energy when used as a smudge. So you might know sage sticks or burning sage to ward off evil spirits. That's still done by spiritualists and other believers of the occult and supernatural today to cleanse homes and to rid areas of what might be considered evil spirits or bad energy. The roots of the sage plant are also used as a salve for sores and wounds because they do have some weak antimicrobial properties. And the whole plant is actually used as a tea for cough and colds. So, in addition to its essential oils used in cough and colds, you can put it in tea. It's a culinary seasoning. It's safe to eat. It's a safe herb. And of course, I love a good sage tea or fragrance. Peppermint. Mentha piperida. So it's an herbaceous hybrid cross species of watermint and spearmint. So you see that X, which is actually the chi symbol in Greek. Mentha X piperida simply means that it is a hybrid species. So whenever you see a hybrid species with a Latin name, it's going to have that little X symbol between it, just to denote that it's a hybrid. It's easy to identify. Anything in the mint family is going to have a square stem. So if you were to look at the stem or even break the stem, you see it's basically a perfect square or close to a perfect square. So that's how you can identify a mint in the wild. It has a high concentration of volatile compounds, which are mostly terpenes, again, volatile oils, most notably menthol, which is a monoterpenoid active medicinal constituent. It's the most commonly used phytoconstituent in peppermint, and it's what gives off peppermint's distinct flavor and smell. It's used since the 18th century, but still used today as a digestive aid in traditional North American medicine systems, whether it's Native American or folk medicine. It's also an analgesic and anti-inflammatory, so it's used in lip balms quite commonly, in cough medicine as well. Of course, we think of decongestants, Vicks Vapo Rubs, and oral hygiene. A nice peppermint is great for halitosis treatment or toothpastes. This one is not as common as pokeberry or pokeweed. It's Phytolacca americana. Real interesting plant, though. Very distinctive. It has these bright red stems and these very enticing and interesting looking berries off of those bright red, almost like magenta stems. It's known as the vegetarian's pufferfish. Now, you might be familiar with Japanese cuisine where you have to be extraordinarily careful, and chefs, indeed, I think have to take courses and be certified to prepare pufferfish because if they don't, it can poison people who eat it. So this is very similar, where these berries are quite poisonous. It's a highly toxic emetic for people who were to ingest those berries. However, those berries, those purple berries which grow in grape-like bunches, are a great food source for songbirds and small mammals in the eastern US. I have a bunch of these in my yard. The birds love them, especially in winter. And they have cultural significance actually from Algonquin because the Algonquin word for them is the same as the word for blood, which it references its use as a red dye. So they would use it as a red dye both for their clothing, for their ceremonies, for their face or war paint. They would use that in their artistic works. And in folk medicine, greens from this, not the berries, of course, but the greens, the leaves of these, were used in Appalachia for poke salad or pokeberry salad after being boiled several times. Why did they boil them several times? That is to denature all of those toxic saponins which would otherwise be toxic. So if you denature them, if you extract them from the leaves actually taste quite good. But again, much like the pufferfish, you have to know exactly how to prepare it, or else you are going to have a bad time. The other reason why I mentioned pokeberry or pokeweed is, in addition to its emetic properties, which we know of, it's also under research for pokeweed antiviral protein, or PAP, which it's had a renewed increase in its research around 2020 because it was found to be effective, at least in vitro, against coronaviruses. So who knows? Where's our next Paxlovid or a potential antiviral in relation to COVID or other SARS type respiratory illness? Maybe it comes from the little innocuous pokeberry or pokeweed that grows in my backyard. We're going to do a quick little review of trees, uh, deciduous versus coniferous plants and trees. Deciduous trees, of course, those are the ones that shed their leaves annually. So the leaves are shed every autumn, often turning colors before falling, and they adapt to tolerate cold environments by going dormant in the winter. So the way that say a maple tree survives the winter is it drops all of its leaves, it goes into this low energy state, and it goes dormant until conditions are right for the leaves to regrow and for its life cycle to continue. Coniferous trees have no such issue with that. They are evergreen trees that do not shed their leaves yearly, and their leaves are usually needle-shaped or scale-like. And they have cones which contain the seeds. So those are our pine cones, right? Or other similar structures. They tolerate cold environments year-round, so of course they do not shed their leaves. So as we go forward, let's talk about some trees that are endemic to the northeastern United States. We have the red cedar, or Juniperus virginiana. Sometimes it's also called a juniper tree. And it's a coniferous tree native to the northeastern US, identifiable by its reddish aromatic wood, distinct blue juniper berries that you can see on the slideshow right there. They're actually the tiniest little pine cones that you'd ever see, but they're called berries because they kind of look like berries. And their active constituents are, again, aromatic compounds, but they do something much more than just smell nice. They are aromatic compounds called cedrine or cedrol and thiopsine, which are known to repel moths and other insects. So you might be familiar with cedar chests or cedar closets where you store clothes, and that keeps them safe from any sort of insects or moths which might get in there and otherwise chew up or lay eggs or harm those clothes or other valuable cloth items. Traditionally, Native American medicine and Indian medicine used it for protection and grounding. It was the leaves and twigs were used as a diuretic, and its oral decoction was used as an expectorant for mucus, sinus infections, and bronchitis. So again, with all of those aromatic compounds, it stands to reason that when you boil it or something, when you vaporize it, it's going to get that clear up that mucus and sort of loosen up those clogged sinuses. However, it was also used in birth control. So cedrine and some of those compounds, I think specifically the thuyo compounds, those thiopsine and other ones, they can actually cause contractions in women. So it was used actually regularly as a birth control for women in these native tribes. Modern day, of course, I said it was used as an insect repellent, used in cedar closets and chests to store clothes. And it's essential oils, and those little juniper berries, those little juniper cones, are actually berries which are used to flavor gin. So if you wonder why gin kind of tastes like a Christmas tree, there's your answer. Eastern white pine. This is otherwise known as Pinus strobus. It's a coniferous tree with distinctive long green needles, pine cones, lots of pitch and sap. Whenever I bring in samples from my students of Pinus strobus, I always make sure to say, yep, just look out for the sap, especially at the end of the twig, because you will get this on your hands. It'll be sticky and it's not coming out easily with soap or otherwise. Its active constituents, this might surprise you, it actually has more vitamin C per serving than both lemons and oranges. So, because of this, it was dried and eaten for nutrition during winter periods of starvation for a lot of the northern Native American tribes up in the northeastern United States and Canada. Its sap was also used to waterproof baskets and canoes because it is hydrophobic sap and it's very sticky and very, you can certainly spread it quite easily. And it was also used as a topical antimicrobial for wounds, which also kind of makes sense, right? Because if water and other contaminants can't breach the barrier of the sap, then of course they didn't have germ theory back then, but they knew that the wounds probably healed better when they were covered in the salve made of the sap of the eastern white pine. Modern day, pine needles can still be used in nutritional supplementation and herbal teas. And the pine tar from burned roots and branches is actually an anthelmic. It can kill tapeworms and roundworms. So some naturopaths or traditional medicine herbalists will still use that today. And the pine tar can even be mixed with sulfur and applied to the scalp to treat dandruff. But going back to ethnobotany or kincentricity, isn't it amazing that the Algonquins, not only did they use the tree as a resource for nutrition during periods of starvation or long cold winters, but they also used parts of the tree for their baskets and canoes, quite literally their infrastructure, their livelihood. And even for topical microbials, topically, they really used every part of the tree in some way to contribute not just to uh, their health beyond basic nutrition, as you would say, as a nutritional supplement with the vitamin C, but even their livelihoods by making waterproof baskets, making it so they can fish using their canoes and travel down the rivers, which really were the highways for the indigenous peoples of the Northeast at the time. And it was even used topically for wounds. So it's amazing how versatile these things can be. Next, we have arborvitae, or Thuya occidentalis. You can see me, that's me standing in front of my lovely stretch of arborvitaes in the backyard of my house. And they're coniferous trees. They're related to cedars, and they have flat, scale-like leaves with small cones, which grow in swamps. They're also known as swamp cedars because they don't quite look like a cedar tree or smell like a cedar tree. However, they do still have that thujone, which is a neurotoxin, GABA antagonist, and convulsant. Pretty nasty. But again, they have high vitamin C content in the bark, which again you could make into a tea to prevent scurvy traditionally. The twigs can also be inhaled and for pleurisy, as per Algonquin traditional medicine practices, or pneumonia. And the leaves can even be made into a poultice for rheumatism, for anti-inflammatory properties if they're sort of mashed together into a pulp and then applied to an aching joint. Modern day, they're mostly ornamental. That's why they were planted in my backyard. And they're an essential oil for aromatherapy, breathing disorders. It's also a component in absinthe as well. That along with wormwood, which actually has whole other not antiviral and other applications, specifically in malaria treatment. Uh, Wormwood, not Aravite, but wormwood, that plant, Artemisia annua, and some other species actually provided the basis for one of the greatest malaria treatments discoveries of all time. In fact, the person who discovered it won the Nobel Prize. So you never know what you're going to find just growing in your backyard. We also have, of course, the sugar maple. I can't be from New England and not mention the sugar maple. We have Acer saccharum. It's a deciduous tree known for its abundance of sap used for maple syrup. So its active constituents, we know it has a ton. It has polyphenols, vitamins like zinc, thiamine, calcium, carbohydrates, natural sugars. You get that from your maple syrup, right? It's a natural sweetener for foods, specifically some pancakes or waffles. And in Algonquin tradition, they also used it in tonics and cough syrups. However, as research grows, and this is my own shameless plug for one of my professors who I had back at the University of Rhode Island, he's researched the cosmetic and even anti-cancer potential of maple syrup. So even and the maple tree at large, not just looking at the syrup, but looking at the bark and other naturally occurring constituents. So sugar maples are a great example of how much we still don't know about some of these traditional practices. So my favorite professor who inspired me to create this course, Dr. Navendra Siram, he was at the University of Rhode Island. Now he's at University of New England up in Portland, Maine. It's a phenolic compound. You can see it right here. Phenolic just meaning it has those phenol groups. And it's a powerful, powerful antioxidant, and we know that eliminates free radicals, which might otherwise lead to cell mutation and death. Hence the antioxidant properties. And it has possible applications that are cosmetic, anti-inflammatory, and maybe even anti-cancer. We're still looking into it, but cosmetically, it may be used as sort of a wrinkle remover, with its astringent properties, which is interesting. I'm not advocating for you to, wash your face with maple syrup. Please don't. But Chemical might be the basis at some point for some cosmetic, some breakthroughs in the cosmetic industry. So for more information, you can go to the website web.uri.edu/maple, and you can see exactly what kind of research Dr. Serum was doing down there. Um, that concludes the lecture for the day. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. If not, I will see you later. Have a good one.